Degas, a French painter and physicist who was also Nip's assistant, would later perfect the exposure technique, reducing the time to produce a photo to 20 minutes. This process would be named the daguerreotype photo. This image of Frederick Douglass was made using this technique. During the 1800s, it was considered a luxury to have your image captured in photos. However, early photos made it difficult to capture smiles because you had to remain still. Moving lips meant blurry photos, as dental care was not great, and smiles would capture rotting teeth. According to Time magazine, photos of that period wanted to reflect the elegance of painted portraits, and during that time, smiling was considered improper for a painted image. Thus, you see photos of old with staunch faces and no smiles. The photography of this period also took on a macabre feature. This would be the era of death photography, where corpses were propped up so they could be photographed as if alive. In this photo, you see a family of children posing for a photo. They wanted to include their youngest sibling who had died, so they propped the youngest child up against an object so she could be included in the photo. By 1861, we have the first color photo, a tartan ribbon. Technology would make leaps and bounds from that point forward. So what gives a photo that wow factor? Well, it has to tell a story, be bold and colorful, use action words, stimulate emotion, and promote conversation. Let's illustrate the wow factor with a few famous photos. The first photo was taken in 1993 by photojournalist Kevin Carter of a starving child being watched by a vulture. Kevin was trying to bring attention to the conditions of the region, but people slammed the journalist, insisting he should have helped the child versus capture the image. See the heart-gripping emotion in this photo featuring Emmett Till and his mother. In 1955, Emmett was beaten and lynched after being falsely accused of winking at a white woman who later recanted her story. Emmett's mother wanted people to see what happened to her son and arranged for an open casket viewing so the world could see and feel the depth of her sorrow and the inhumanness of the men who tortured Emmett. Fast forward to the 1968 Olympics, where Tommy Smith and John Carlos created a drop-the-mic moment by raising their fists into the air, signaling Black Power after accepting their gold and bronze Olympic medals. This moment stunned the world and was considered one of the most intensifying political statements of any major sporting event of that time. There are also photos that are iconic and some of the most widely talked about images of time. Who could forget the veil that Coretta Scott King wore during the funeral of the Dr. Martin Luther King, or the Marilyn Monroe photo that captured that famous pose in her white dress that would later sell for $4.6 million. This photo of the airness, Michael Jordan, requires no words. From around the globe, his image is known everywhere and would later be adopted as the logo named Jumpman for Nike. This is certainly an image that makes you go, whoa. The most noted image from 9/11 and the World Trade Center attack was not the planes flying into the building. This photo of firefighters erecting the flag touched the hearts across the globe. Finally, we thought there could be no image more shattering than those of 9/11. Regrettably, we were wrong. The image of George Floyd with a police officer kneeling on his neck as he died transfixed the globe and brought the world to tears. This is the power of images. Not all images can move people. When they're humorous or informative, they will likely be shared. But if they don't have color, they typically won't go viral. So what is the most viewed photo of all time? This image, entitled Bliss. This image is the default wallpaper for the Windows operating system and has been viewed by over 1 billion people. Charles O'Rear took the photo in 1996 in Sonoma County, California, and Microsoft purchased the rights in 2000 for a sum purported to be over $100,000. Images move you, and they can say in 13 milliseconds what words can take a lifetime to communicate. Perhaps that's why 3,500 photos are downloaded to Facebook per second. At the end of the day, Images equal art, and the real power comes from what you can make others see. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Michelle Pierce Mobley, and I want to welcome you to another segment of Tabernacle Talks. I'm glad you chose to join us for tonight's show, Things That Make You Go, Whoa. My guest today is friend and fellow scholar, Carolyn Bodie-Gunn. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Before we really get into some serious photos, I do have to share an icebreaker photo because we're coming off of Labor Day, and I just had to mention that I'm sure a lot of us are feeling stuffed right now, but I just have to say something about those folks, usually our family, who come over to eat and they don't offer to bring anything.
When Auntie says, get as much as you want, she literally does not mean this. I'm still laughing at this picture because we all have people that we invite over who brings other people.
Well, I ran across this photo and I just had to share it because I can recall a Thanksgiving where we had a family member who took both legs off of the turkey and put them on their plate, and it was just hysterical.
Even during times of COVID, we still have people taking advantage. Some of you better take note. Times are hard. Don't block your blessings being silly.
Okay, I'm not sure that some of you are wondering about what's tonight's show about things that make you go, whoa, but over the past few weeks, I've been collecting images that I've either received on social media or images that I actually collected myself. And I have to say that there are a lot of things and images that are going around on social media right now that are sparking a lot of conversation, or some that just downright make you mad. So tonight we're going to share some of those images with the folks that are viewing with us this afternoon.
Michelle, thanks for asking me to chime in. I think our photos tonight are really going to stir up some conversation. To our audience that are watching this evening, feel free to comment about the photos during the broadcast. We want to hear from you and would appreciate your online participation. If you think the photo is a whoa, post it. We want to know what you think.
Okay, let's move to our first image. This first image is of a real stop sign on Highway F as you move onto the interstate between Milwaukee and Madison, Wisconsin. And I found the sign pretty funny, but I guess it works.
One of the comments under this photo asks, what would happen if you were stopped by the police for failing to stop? Could you say, officer, there was no stop sign? I'm sitting here wondering if the sign is even legit.
Well, I think the sign is cute, and I'm just wondering if anybody knows, is this sign even legal? I'm not sure. It's probably at the end of someone's driveway. What do you think? I'm not sure about that one. Let's go to our next photo. And this photo is actually mind-boggling because it shows the projected growth of Zoom's revenue since the onset of the pandemic. Have you ever used Zoom? Well, I can assure you the world now knows what Zoom is, and this will probably be the normal way that business meetings are conducted. Oh, I see you're pulling out your cell phone. What are you doing, Carolyn?
Looking up stock prices. Never mind. Zoom stock fell last week. According to the Motley Fool, when investors saw the sales growth at Zoom, they started bidding up their share prices. The problem is the market is expected to turn, and when it does, these high-priced growth stocks sell off violently. The traders hurry to lock in profits, and the rapid sales of these stocks can cause prices to fall sharply.
Hey, that's pretty impressive, Carolyn. I didn't know you knew your stock market. Wow. Okay, let's move on to our next picture. Chadwick Boseman, my hero. And I picked this next photo because I think he is a modern-day superhero who recently died from colon cancer. But I picked this photo because someone chose to post a less than stellar image of a superhero. And if you could see the posted photo in the yellow jacket, people were speculating and posting at that point that he was on drugs.
It never occurred to them that something much bigger was going on with him and that he was privately battling cancer. It just shows you don't know the battles that people are fighting, and so it's not cool to judge people. I'm sure it was hard for him to undergo chemotherapy and making movies. I wonder why we're so quick to pounce on people when they don't look the way we think they should. This brother showed tremendous class by dealing with his situation privately. He is truly a superhero. Very deep brother.
Yes, and unfortunately, we all have so-called friends who will post images of us that are less than flattering. But I want to say rest in peace because he was truly, truly remarkable. Our next photo is one that makes me go, whoa, because this is the photo of Governor of Ohio, Governor DeWine. And according to Hill.com, 3 Republican members of the Ohio House of Representatives thought it would be a good idea to draft articles of impeachment, citing his handling of COVID-19 as the reason. My gripe is not about his party affiliation, because that's not why I'm appalled for their actions.
COVID is killing people. The governor is doing unprecedented things to save people's lives. I'm dumbfounded at how people are more concerned about malls and restaurants being open than saving lives. I think we have a slide that depicts what COVID is doing.
Which I think brings us to our next slide when we look at hospitalization and death rate by race by COVID. And so before folks in our audience start gasping about why we had a DeWine slide, this slide should explain why. I think he handled the COVID crisis as best anybody could, and hopefully we learned from the pandemic of 1918 that killed 50 million people that we have to do better.
When I look at these statistics from the Center for Disease Control, that tells me that Black people are being hospitalized 4 times more than white citizens and dying 2 times greater than white citizens. This governor cares about people. Yes, Black and brown people. This has nothing to do with party affiliation. This is about caring for people.
Well, I have to say, thank goodness the rest of the Ohio legislature didn't agree. We just basically had 3 rogues who felt that he needed to be impeached. But with everything he has on his plate right now, we have to have members of our own party. He's got them nipping at his heels. It's shameful. I'm glad the rest of the legislature found that this was out of order and shut those 3 rogues down. Okay, we got to go to our next photo. It's pretty brilliant. I think it is a brilliant way to educate people about racism. Most people know the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. What's so masterful about this slide is the assumption that people make when they come upon the scene of a crime. It's these assumptions that create so much disharmony.
There are so many present-day examples of this. Remember the woman in the dog park in New York that said she was going to call the police and tell them a Black man was accosting her simply because he told her that her dog needed to be on a leash? Or what about how people of color are asked to prove where their life when seen in the yards in certain neighborhoods?
Well, I hope nobody wants to use this slide during their inclusion training at the federal level, as it appears that race-related training sessions, according to the president, are un-American propaganda and are no longer going to be funded. So that's a definite whoa. Okay, our next picture. Now, this doesn't make you go, whoa. This story broke with the NBA about a week or so ago. And according to the report, only 20% of players in the NBA are registered to vote. I'm still floored that with all the advocacy coming from the players, they find themselves weeks before the election unregistered to vote.
It's my understanding that outspoken coaches like Doc Rivers are working on an initiative to get every eligible player registered to vote before the election. But what a huge disappointment that somehow it's not resonating with the players how important this is.
I also heard that LeBron James and the NBA are working to turn all NBA arenas to polling locations. Perhaps that'll make the process easier for the players as long as they register. So that image for me gets a double whoa.
Whoa.
Okay, we're gonna move to our next image. I call this one the Kenosha cartoon. For people who've been following the incident in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a black man, Jacob Blake, was shot 7 times in his back. And this incident spurred riots. And during those riots, actually 2 days later, there's a 17-year-old white resident from Illinois. He actually shot and killed 2 people and wounded a 3rd person, but he was actually able to walk away from the scene with a rifle in tow. He went home, went to bed, and it took 4 days for him to be charged with a crime.
Yet, Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old carrying a replica toy gun, was immediately shot and killed by a police officer in Cleveland.
So a gun-toting 7-year-old white child is not a threat, but a 12-year-old black child is. That's definitely a whoa. Our next image, I call that one, that's tired of being black in America. Now here's a slide that I thought was pretty profound. It depicts generations of killing in our country. Each time, I'm sure the community thought it would get better, only to find that each generation has their own George Floyd.
Yes, I remember the Rodney King beating. I never thought it could get any worse than that. I was wrong. I'm sure the folks who viewed Emmett Till's body never thought it could get worse either. It seemed like the same story, just a different year.
But I can tell you one thing, Carolyn, this generation is demanding change and justice. They just may have the gumption to make lasting changes. They believed us when we said things would get better. They just never saw it. My next photo, 1,312 bad cops. It basically says if you have 12 bad cops and 1,300 good cops, but the 1,300 good cops don't turn into 12 bad cops, you have 1,312 bad cops. And, you know, I'm afraid that silence, that code of silence just creates a cloud over the entire department. And I think there's a pervasive mindset that just can't be attributed to our culture when we talk about people don't snitch.
Neil Trotman, 2000, director of the National Institute of Ethics, did a study which involved 3,714 officers and academy recruits from 42 different states. 8%, 40 of the 509 officers who admitted to intentionally withholding the information about officer misconduct were upper administrators. The upper administrators of the average American police department comprises only 5% of the agency. The average age of an officer who covered up an incident for the first time was 31.4 years of age. The average years of experience when they first took part in the Code of Silence was 8.2 years. 449 of the 532 officers were male, while 74 were female. Of the 532 who confessed they had participated in the Code of Silence, 252 were pressured to keep quiet by the officers who committed the misconduct, and 118 felt pressure from uninvolved officers. The remaining 162 officers advised they covered up the incident, even though they were not pressured. Excessive use of force was the most frequent situation over which the Code of Silence occurs, with 217 were excessive use of force circumstances.
Wow, thanks for those stats, and I think they're extremely troubling. So when we go to our next slide, I don't know that I have anything to say about that one, except it's pretty troubling. Someone sent me this image, and I just had to pause for a minute because they tried to, I guess, justify that we get so angry when we see the image on the left of a white officer holding a gun to a black citizen's head, but we don't get equally angry about the image on the right. And I was just dumbfounded that somebody sent that to me as though that was a logical argument for that image.
FBI crime statistics between 2005 and 2010. 60% of all violent injuries in this country were inflicted by loved ones or acquaintances. And 60% of the time, those victimizations happen in the home. In 2011, 79% of murderers reported to the FBI, in which the victim-offender relationship was known, were committed by friends, loved ones, or acquaintances.
So that just goes to show this entire black-on-black crime is tiring. We never hear the term white-on-white crime. And because we know there's a high likelihood that you're going to be killed by someone you know, if your circle looks like you, that's more reflective of the lack of diversity in our communities and not because we stalk each other more than anyone else.
The image on the left is more troubling because that person is paid by citizens to protect and defend. We have to demand there be a difference between Pookie and law enforcement. When we can't tell the difference, then we have a problem.
You said that. I also found the next image troubling as well. But it basically says that black employees are exhausted. And the next post is by Shaniqua Golding, and it's powerful. In her article, Maintaining Professionalism in the Age of Black Death is a Lot, Shaniqua writes about being tired watching all the murders and mayhem in our communities while still trying to hold it together on her job. One of my colleagues is a black professor at a predominantly white university, and she shared with me that there's absolutely been zero mention about the riots, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, nothing. Absolutely no mention of these issues.
In fact, the Society of Human Resource Management stated that more than 67% of organizations have not asked employees about their opinions on racial injustice and the protest against it that started in May. 45% of black workers and 30% of white workers said their organizations discouraged such discussions.
And you know, I know this is a difficult and uncomfortable subject, but there has to be some acknowledgement of the cataclysmic shift in our societal values and the way that black and brown employees are being mistreated. When we had the tornado, everybody was talking about it. When we had mass shootings in the area, everybody was talking about it so the community could heal. But when there's a shooting of a person of color, everyone becomes judgmental. You start seeing black crime statistics, and you start seeing all this propaganda circulating that somehow they must have done something. So I made the mistake of responding to this post the other day, and at some point, race came into the discussion. And it was at that point I heard that 99% of police shootings are justified, and I just simply replied, justified by whom? Which brings me to our next whoa. At the end of the day, the takeaway is not blacks versus whites, it's blacks versus racism. And I'm concerned that we have people on both sides of this argument who believe the resolution is pitting people against one another, but that's exactly why we're in the mess we're in.
All blacks are not militant and all whites are not racist. Simple fact.
Yeah, but I think the problem is the inability to engage in any type of dialogue before somebody gets mad or they start name calling or taking their facts from blogs and social media posts without looking for vetted sources. Many of these blogs are simply somebody's opinion, and these opinions are not always factual. Okay, I got a cartoon for you now. This is Dennis the Menace, and I absolutely love this post of the cartoon Dennis the Menace.
Me too. Here you see Dennis telling his mom that the only difference between him and his friend is that his friend is left-handed.
Now, research by Natalia Gerso reveals that by age 6, children are aware of social stereotypes. And she goes on to say that young children have an early understanding about race and are able to categorize people that way. So trying to teach children sameness without acknowledging that people are actually different beyond gender is a necessary strategy to combat racism. And one study has shown that this leads to significantly less prejudice.
I often wonder where all these racist adults came from. Well, if you're not talking about race in the home and you allow your children to learn it from peers or from TV, it's like throwing the dice, hoping they learn positive things. It also helps to find ways to be in diverse surroundings versus homogeneous groups where you only learn about others from what you read and not what you actually experience.
Now, this is our final photo for the evening, but I do want to spend some time on this. Over the past several months, I'd been searching through photos from the 1918 pandemic. And these photos have been interesting, and I've provided, a nostalgic look back to the impact of the 1918 pandemic on the lives of ordinary people. And I had commented to an associate of mine that I was having difficulty finding photographs that captured the experience of Black Americans during the 1918 flu pandemic until I found this photo. And I was initially happy that I had found a photo from the period until I looked closer at that photo. And so I pushed back from my laptop and I stared at that image, and tears began to well in my eyes because I concluded that just as we're fighting to engage the hearts of mankind across the globe, that Black Lives Matter, here was yet another reminder, not always. For those who look at this photo and still don't get it, here we see what appears to be 3 healthcare workers wearing masks to protect themselves from a deadly flu virus. But we now also see 3 people, one of which is a child, wearing nothing to protect them from the deadly virus. Now, I'm sure because none of us were there when this photo was made, that we can't possibly know what's truly behind the image. However, if our logical selves accepts the reality that photos capture events to later be recalled, then someone captured a reality that transcended time. In that space, at that moment, 3 of those lives mattered less than 3 other lives. So for the cynic, they could view this photo and surmise this Black family was seeking services and was captured on their way to obtain their masks from the healthcare workers in the photo. And perhaps we simply do not have the after photo where services have been rendered. Yes, there are those who would argue that one photo does not tell the entire story and that the writer is simply being overly sensitive to a photo without context. But for the pragmatist who views this photo within today's context of disparities in healthcare for Black and brown people, the context becomes clearer. The realities of 2020 were the same realities of 1918. Black and brown skin was not given the same worth. And I believe the photographer was intentional and captured an ugly part of our past, the part where color mattered, where living was reserved for the privileged. And this photo is why people march and why people across the globe are crying out against tyranny.
50 million people died as a result of the Spanish flu, one of the deadliest flus in our history. And here we sit looking at what appears to be a family. Wait, a Black family without masks. Let that sink in. This is why we march and pray that all lives matter and that no race will ever again be valued over the other.
Well, this photo definitely made me say, whoa.
Whoa.
Double whoa. Well, Carolyn, that concludes tonight's program about things that make you say whoa. And I appreciate the participation of our audience tonight, and I hope we provided some valuable information and sparked conversations that'll continue long after this broadcast is over
I also want to thank you for joining me on tonight's show. I appreciate your scholarly influence. As we close tonight, let us be reminded of the words of an old Chinese proverb that a picture is worth 10,000 words. Good night.
Who's that talking, and what are they talking about? Tabernacle Talks, that's what everybody is talking about. And once you watch us, you'll be talking about us too. We stream live every Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube Live, right from the studios of Dayton, Ohio. We have some great shows planned for you. On September 15th, you'll hear American history from the vantage point of America's indigenous people. This will be a great presentation from Guy Jones of the Lakota tribe and a great history lesson for everyone in the family. On September 22nd, we'll have the Clutter Busters on site. Professional organizer Lori Fursden showing how to declutter your space and your life. This is a must-see for our hoarders and people who just can't seem to throw things away. Remember, cleanliness is next to godliness. And finally, on September 29th, tune in to hear one couple's story about interracial dating and the challenges they face as America comes to grips with the call for a post-racial society. You definitely don't want to miss this show. Thank you for joining today's program. We hope you found it nourishing for your mind, body, and soul. Please leave comments because we'd love to hear from you.